Hi, book nerd besties! It's Ellie here, and I'm here today to do my very first book review with you guys. I gave you the title a few days ago when I posted my intro video, and I am doing the Winter Soul series for my first review today. The reason I chose to do the entire series, I told you guys I would tell you. I feel like this series is not complete until you've read every book, which every series is like that to a certain extent, but I really felt like I couldn't do just one book out of this series and do it justice. I kind of need to talk about all of them in order to explain why I love it so much. So that's why I chose to do all 4 of the books in this series at once. So this is the Winter Soul series. It's by author Jennifer Kropf. It is a 4-book young adult fantasy series. There's lots of magic, lots of adventure, lighthearted, laughter, that kind of thing, and a clean, slow burn romance. Since this book is intended for teenagers, it's very clean, but it's still a very enjoyable and sweet romance. Although if you are looking for spice, this probably isn't for you. So I'll start by going through each of the titles. The very first book is A Soul as Cold as Frost. So this book is pretty short. It's only about 350 pages if I remember right. This book is a little bit slower than the others, but it lays the groundwork for everything that you'll see throughout the rest of the series. So that book alone isn't super exciting, which is another reason I chose to review the entire series at once. But it is really important because it sets up the groundwork for the more exciting stuff that happens in the later books. The second book, which is my personal favorite, is A Heart as Red as Paint. This is where Helen really starts getting going in her character growth, where she and her companion, who I will introduce in a little bit, start to have a little bit more romantic action between them, and they start getting into more of the politics of this realm that's explored in this book, or in this book series, rather. The third book is A Crown as Sharp as Pines. This was probably my least favorite of all the books. It's a little bit shorter, and it's more of a bridge between the second and fourth books rather than a standalone story. Still really important to the development of the series, but it's not super exciting on its own. The last book is A Beast as Dark as Night. So this wraps up everything that's happened in the other books. It is very exciting, very action-packed. Things get a little bit darker for the characters in this particular book. The romance comes to fruition at the end of this. A lot of friendships are tested. There's a lot of character growth, not just for the main character, but for the others as well. And there's a lot of exciting twists and turns, things I didn't see coming in this final book. So, let's give you a little synopsis of the series as a whole. This follows a female main character, a teenager named Helen Bell, who lives in Waterloo, Canada. At the beginning of the series, I wasn't a huge fan of her at first, to be honest, because I thought she seemed like a little bit of a weak character. The first half of the first book, I kind of thought, she's not super exciting. She doesn't do a whole lot on her own. But that did change throughout the series, and I'll go into that a little bit deeper later in this video. So Helen is out shopping with her family one day when a stranger stumbles upon her, knocks her down, and then gives her a magical object as a gift, tells her to protect it, and then runs away with no other explanation. Helen is understandably shaken up by this. She's very confused, but it immediately opens her eyes to a magical new world that is all around her. Helen starts to see creatures and people that no one else around her seems to be able to see, and she starts becoming threatened by some of these creatures and animals who are trying to take this magical object from her that was given to her by this stranger. In this new world, she meets a young man named Zane who gives her a little bit of explanation as to what this gift she's been given it does, what it is, what's the purpose of it, and what she's going to have to do to protect it and herself. He is her companion throughout the entire rest of the series, and there is some romance between them. It's a very, very slow burn, very subtle, and it doesn't really come to fruition until the last couple of books. So if you're looking for a more heavy romance, probably not for you, but I enjoy a slow burn. And like I said before, it is young adult fantasy, so it's a very clean romance. Very subtle, but very sweet, and I enjoyed it a lot. So Helen and Zane go on a lot of adventures as they're trying to protect this object she's been given. The first book is pretty straightforward. They have one enemy to face. It's a cruel witch who's taken over the most powerful kingdom in Winter, which is the magical land Helen has journeyed into. First book is pretty straightforward. One enemy, one major adventure. I won't give away any spoilers, but like I said, it really just sets things up for the next few books. after the first book, you start to have a stronger enemy in Winter that is taking over multiple kingdoms within this land, and it becomes much more complex. You see a lot more of the political and social intricacies of this world. Helen is an outsider, so she's a little bit out of her depth at first, but Zane and other friends she meets along the way are able to help her navigate this complex socio-political environment that she needs to be able to survive in order to fulfill her purpose in Winter, that she's been called to by being given this gift by a stranger. So it gets a lot more complicated in the second book, which is why that one's my favorite. She gets to navigate the culture of this new world, the politics of this new world, and she makes some new friends, meets some new enemies, and she's in a lot more danger in this second one, which is, again, why it's my favorite. I think it's the most exciting. The third book, like I said before, is kind of just a bridge between the second and fourth books, but this is where Helen starts to be confronted by the reality of the dangers she's facing. She starts to exhibit some signs of major anxiety and a little bit of depression, which I think is a really great thing for a young adult book to explore. You know, a lot of young adult fantasy books, they have these young characters going on these adventures and facing all this danger and not really reconciling in their minds what they've gone through. You know, they just are able to handle it perfectly, and as you and I both know, nobody's able to handle all their struggles without struggling internally. So that was one thing I really liked about this series as well, is it kind of explores Helen's mental health as she goes through all this stuff. And that's what the third book is a lot about. It's a lot about her mental health. It's a lot about how the people around her come together to support her and how she becomes stronger by dealing with the things she's dealing with. The fourth book is also very complex. It's much darker than the first three. The enemies get stronger, the believers and the band of people around Helen are hunted and persecuted. The socio-political landscape of the world really starts to get dicey, very dicey, lots of persecution, lots of torture, unethical political leaders, that kind of thing. And it is a very hopeless, bleak landscape in that last book until the very end. I won't give away spoilers, that's not what this is for, but, you know, there is a very satisfying ending. So one of my favorite things about this series and why I love it so much is Helen's character growth. And that's something I touched on a little bit earlier in this video. You know, I kind of thought she was a boring character at first. The first book, Zane does most of the work, and for the first half of it anyway, and I kind of was unimpressed, to be honest. And I remember thinking to myself when I was reading, you know, she's a little bit of a weak character. But my mind was changed on that. Even in the first book, she starts to come out of her shell and grow. She becomes much more self-assured, and she's willing to take risks that she wouldn't have been able to take before because of her fear. But as she goes throughout the series, she learns to rely on her own inner strength and resolution, and rely on her friends and family around her. Speaking of family, that's another one of my favorite things about this book, is the bond between Helen and her siblings. They are orphans, they live with their grandmother, and there are some ups and downs in their relationship throughout the series, which I think is another really realistic and beautiful thing for the author to have explored. Because, again, in a lot of young adult fantasy novels, the protagonist's family is maybe not even involved, or they don't tell them. But Helen not only shares her adventures with her family, but she faces rejection from some of them. Her brother is not happy to be part of this new world she's found. He's not willing to believe her even at first. But throughout the series, they're reconciled. She goes through a lot of ups and downs with her brother and her sister, who becomes a really strong, supportive character throughout the series. And that was one of my favorite things, was to watch the relationship between Helen and her siblings grow throughout the book and see that strong familial bond that that is lacking in a lot of young adult books. So that was something I thought was really, really beautiful. People that would like this book, I'll give you, if you are into like Harry Potter, Narnia, anything like that, this is going to be a book for you. Another book series that this reminded me of was The Ranger's Apprentice, if any of you guys have read that. This is very much a young adult book, so if you're looking for anything super serious, super deep, probably not for you. If you're looking for spicy romance, definitely not for you. But this is a very beautiful book. It's a light, easy read. It's not something that's going to take you weeks to read. They're all pretty short books. I read the entire series in about 2 weeks, and that was around the holidays when I was super busy. So it's a pretty easy read, They're all super short, but it's one of those reads that just really warms your heart. It wasn't a super heavy read, like I said, but I enjoyed it just because to me, it was very satisfying to read a very straightforward, you know, good people win in the end kind of story. It is supposed to be Christmas themed, the author says. I didn't necessarily see that too much. I mean, it was a little bit Christmas themed, but it wasn't a strong Christmas theme, so I think you'd be able to enjoy this book easily at any time of the year. But it is a great thing to read in the winter, very cozy. So anyway, I hope you guys check out this book. I haven't seen it a whole lot online, but I definitely would recommend it to anyone that's interested in magic, fantasy, adventure, that kind of thing. I think it's worth the time to read. It's not super expensive or anything. Just 4 books, 4 short little books, a very beautiful and heartwarming series with characters that are relatable, and it's fun to watch them grow up, fun to watch the characters grow as they go throughout this adventure. All right, so we've come to the end of the video. This was a little bit longer than I intended, but I thank you guys for hanging in there. I hope you enjoyed this and appreciated it. The next book review I will be doing is over A Picture of Dorian Gray, so a little bit different direction than this series. That's a classical book. It has some darker themes, a little bit more serious read, and it's not a series, it's a standalone. So if you have read that book and are interested in hearing my thoughts on it, stay tuned. I will probably be posting that review within the next week or so. So I hope you guys come back and keep reading, okay? Let me know in the comments what you thought of this review and what you would like to see me review in the future. All right, see you guys.